Desperation turns to more heartbreak and tragedy in northern Gaza. At least 100 Palestinians killed, hundreds more hurt while trying to get food. Hello everyone, I'm Asa-El Namdar in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Eyewitnesses say Israeli forces fired on a crowd of Palestinians trying to get flour from 8 trucks on a road near Gaza City. Palestinian officials say more than 100 people were killed, more than 700 injured. An Israeli military spokesman says the soldiers fired when crowds stormed the convoys. More than 500,000 people at risk of famine now, and that's according to the United Nations. The Gaza Health Ministry says the death toll now stands at more than 30,000 Palestinians, the majority women and children. For more on the situation in Gaza, let me turn to Nour Odeh. She's a political analyst and joins us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Nour, let me begin with this tragic situation that unfolded in Gaza. The scramble for food turns deadly. The Palestinian Health Ministry says more than 100 people were killed in chaotic scenes. What are you hearing about what exactly went so horribly wrong?
Well, thank you for having me, Asa. What went so horribly wrong is that Palestinians in Gaza, especially in the north, are being deliberately starved. Hundreds of thousands of people have not had any aid delivered to them in a dignified manner in the amount that they require it. And we've already seen at least 7 children, 7 babies, in fact, die of severe malnutrition because of that siege. Now, the residents who are starving, who have less than 1 meal a day now, if at all, heard that there would be an aid convoy coming to the northern Gaza, to Gaza City in the north, and they stayed out on the street where the convoy was expected to come since the late night hours. As soon as that convoy approached and people tried to get a sack of flour, which they haven't seen in months in some cases, the Israeli forces, as we understood from eyewitnesses, fired at them. They fired bullets and they fired artillery, and these people stayed languishing, injured, dying overnight until people braved the dangers and were able to retrieve them and give them a chance at fighting their injuries and recovering in the debilitated hospitals in Gaza City and in the north. And so the death toll, unfortunately, is expected to rise.
The level of suffering is truly staggering, Nour, and you touched upon some of those challenges for the displaced people of Gaza. You talked about famine, and the UN says more than 500,000 Palestinians are just one step away from famine. I want you to take a listen to what we heard from the International Committee of the Red Cross, just describing the unimaginable horrors taking place in Gaza.
People are being forced to eat animal fodder. You know, parents are having to make the choice between how many days they can survive without food so that their children can eat even 1 meal a day. The situation is horrific. It's only getting worse. I'd say it was catastrophic for civilians right now who are living in Gaza. It is not sustainable. They cannot continue to live this way.
You know, Nour, Gaza has seen a lot of heartbreak, a lot of conflicts through the years, but never anything like this.
Never anything like this. The level of brutality of the situation, the extreme nature of the hardships civilians are going through to be, reduced to eating animal feed. I saw a picture, a video actually captured by a journalist in the north of people and a horse eating out of the same container. That's how hungry people are. They are willing to eat anything that is edible, and sometimes knowing that they will get sick. But people want to survive. They have no chance at that, because they are under siege, because they know that aid is not being allowed. And now, their conclusion out of today's horrific incident is that these aid trucks are more like a death trap. So it's, it remains to be seen whether people and their will to live will brave another incident, will come to another aid convoy if they hear that it's coming, in the coming days, if Israel allows any more aid trucks in.
So what's been the big issue with these aid trucks? Why are they having such a difficult time getting in?
Well, we have to remember that since the beginning of the war, we heard from the most senior Israeli officials saying that they will be turning off everything on Gaza. No water, no food, no medicine, no fuel. And they've really lived up to that. And in the past month, we heard from the United Nations saying that the aid that Israel has allowed into the Gaza Strip, aid donated by other countries, not by Israel, has dropped by about 50%. All of the aid that has entered Gaza since this onslaught began in October of last year doesn't even begin to meet 10% of the overwhelming humanitarian needs of the population, which is predominantly displaced and now also predominantly hungry. The most hungry children in the world now live in Gaza. And that's not by chance. This is a deliberate policy. The 8 trucks that are waiting, kilometers long of trucks waiting at the border with Gaza, they're waiting not because they are inept, but because they're made to wait by the Israeli government, and because Israelis are allowed to obstruct the entrance of crossings with Gaza in the name of protest. While people die of hunger. This is a deliberate policy, and countries can bring it to an end, but they are doing, sufficing with statements and sufficing with urging Israel to do more when it is, in fact, doing less, as we heard from the UN.
And what about the situation at Gaza hospitals, in Khan Yunis, in Jabalia, in Gaza City? Are there any hospitals at this point that are even operational?
I heard one of the doctors today describe the hospitals as more like first aid points, but that's the only thing they have, especially in the north. So Al-Shifa Hospital is receiving the injured. A few brave doctors who haven't been killed or disappeared by Israel continue to operate that hospital. They receive the injured. They try to give them medical assistance, but there is no fuel and there is no electricity, and they aren't able to do complex surgeries. So in most times, as the doctors have been talking to the media all day today, they even have to amputate without anesthesia. The situation is even worse in the north, in Jabalia, where the hospitals that attend to mothers and to newborn babies had declared 2 days ago that they couldn't operate anymore because they ran out of fuel. Today, they were taking the fuel out of the cars into the generators in order to keep people who were on life support alive long enough to operate on. So the situation is beyond desperate. The health sector has been brought to its knees, again, in a very deliberate, systematic attack, one after the other. In Khan Yunis, the Nasser Hospital, which is the second largest in the Gaza Strip, it's no longer operational. The only, operational hospitals in Gaza are those in Rafah, and they're not even hospitals by any measure. They are oversized clinics, if you will, and they're already at 300% capacity.
And I know you know what the Israelis are saying. They're saying some of these hospitals are command and control centers for Hamas, and they are determined to destroy Hamas in any way, shape, or form. Let me move on to negotiations going on in Doha. President Biden seems to be optimistic. A deal is close. What are you hearing on your end?
Well, I'm hearing that that Biden is the only one who's optimistic. I'm not sure if his optimism is motivated more by Democratic primaries and the need to kind of signal to his disgruntled base that he is doing something. Certainly the events today will complicate the efforts, will complicate the serious efforts by the mediators, Qatar and Egypt, to bring on a ceasefire during the month of Ramadan, which is just, less than 2 weeks away. But there is still hope. There is still hope that the remaining days will see a ceasefire that would last up to 6 weeks, where up to 40 Israeli captives would be released, and perhaps as many as 400 Palestinian captives would be released. But more importantly, that we would see humanitarian assistance enter Gaza without any obstruction, without any restrictions, and we would see, maybe, as we've heard about the discussions, a gradual return of Palestinians who were displaced from Gaza City and the north to the south, returning gradually back to the north. And I think that would be indispensable to alleviating the human suffering. The fact that Rafah is packed with 1.5 million people, and the Israeli government is talking about invading Rafah even if there is a ceasefire, so they would wait the ceasefire out and then resume the fighting. Just the thought of having 1.5 million people trapped in Rafah is, I think, nightmare invoking, and many people in many countries are trying to work a way to make sure that that doesn't happen, at least that we, there wouldn't be that many people in Rafah if it does happen.
And finally, I have to ask you about some new developments where you are in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank and the resignation of Palestinian Authority Prime Minister. Was that a surprise? And how does that play into all the developments and everything else that's going on in Gaza?
It wasn't very surprising. This government was a dead government walking for months, even before October 7. But the war on Gaza kind of brought into sharp focus just how broken the status quo is and the real need for change. The resignation, of course, doesn't change much in the status quo because the government will continue on as a caretaker government. What is needed is much more than changing faces. Palestinians want to see a government that is actually able to deliver, that can work together, and that can be inclusive and rule over the West Bank and Gaza together. So we're a long way from that, and getting there would require serious inter-Palestinian dialogue, which we haven't seen many serious signals of as of yet.
All right, we'll leave it there. Nour Odeh, thank you very much. Let's turn to our panel now. Joining us from Oklahoma is Joshua Landis. He's the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Here in Washington is Saeed Arikat. He's the DC correspondent for Quds Daily and a former spokesman with the United Nations Assistance Mission for Iraq. And from Jerusalem, we have Amotz, Asa-El, a research fellow with the Shalom Hartman Institute and a senior commentator for the Jerusalem Post. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Amotz, let me begin with you. What are you hearing about what has happened in Gaza with the distribution of food, this tragedy that unfolded with more than 100 Palestinians killed? What are you hearing from the IDF?
This news has just broken out very recently, and no one seems to have correspondence on the field. There are only people being debriefed by various news organizations via sort of media. And what I understand from the BBC is that most of the fatalities are from trucks running over them. All this happened, obviously, in the middle of a food distribution situation. This is what we know. And there were soldiers present in some distance, and there were skirmishes, but I don't know more than this.
All right, well, let me move on to the overall general situation, a disastrous situation in Gaza, overwhelmed by desperation, hunger, and malnutrition. And what happened today with all these people gathering at the food distribution center to just get some flour, and this horror is unleashed upon them, just shows you how bad the situation is. And Saeed, my next question is for you. The Gaza Health Ministry says 6 children have died from malnutrition in northern Gaza. Listen to what Jan Egeland from the Norwegian Refugee Council had to say. He's basically saying the pictures we're seeing don't really capture what is really happening. Take a listen.
You have to come to Gaza to understand the devastation, the destitution, and the desperation of the people here. I have never in my many years as an aid worker seen a place that has been so bombarded for such a long time with such a trapped population without any escape.
Saeed, getting aid to Gaza was already difficult. Not enough was getting in. So many people are in need. And then what happened today, you got to wonder, is it going to even make it more difficult, literally impossible for these aid trucks to get in?
Yes, thank you for having me. I mean, you raise a good point. Remember, Gaza before October 7 was besieged. In fact, there were so many calories that were allowed by Israel for every person in Gaza to have. So it was always on the verge of starvation, under total control of an occupying force. So the situation was awful to begin with. Now, since October 7, we have seen, like Mr. England said, a total destruction beyond description. But for Palestinians in Gaza, I think what we see is just another episode of the Israeli crimes, Israeli genocidal war committed against them. It will go on. I mean, this is not the end. I don't think Israel will flinch from committing another massacre, probably tomorrow, probably tonight, probably in the next half an hour. We don't know. But they have done this time and time again. And unfortunately, because the international community allows it to commit these monstrosities, these crimes, with impunity. I mean, the United States of America, Israel's main supplier of arms and munitions and money and funds and political cover, continues to reject the ceasefire, continues to act, defiantly of the rest of the world. So yes, I think that Israel will continue to do this. They will starve Palestinians, as you said. There are children, 7, 8. I don't know. My newspaper says actually scores of children have died as a result of starvation. So one never knows, but the situation will get a lot worse.
Amotz, I'm going to let you respond to what Saeed had to say. We are hearing a lot of words like genocide, massacre, collective punishment of Palestinians for the actions of Hamas militants that were atrocious in what happened. Go ahead. I'll let you respond.
Well, thank you. First of all, there was no famine, no hunger in Gaza until October 7th. This is your invention, Said. It's a libel. Secondly, there is no genocide, God forbid. Genocide means the deliberate mass murder of the population. This is not at all what is happening in Gaza. What is happening in Gaza is that the Israelis are targeting military targets, namely warriors, missile launchers, armories, and the tunnels where they all hide. And these, sadly and tragically, are wrapped deliberately as a matter of tactic and strategy by Hamas. They're being wrapped by population. The population is being forced into a battlefield, into a war that was started by Hamas. And in fact, the whole 17 years of Hamas's rule in Gaza were one celebration of the population's abuse. This is what you need, what you say need to address if you want to really affect the situation and not just bandy around slogans and make up libels against Israel. That's not going to advance any of us anywhere.
Saeed?
Well, I mean, all I can say is that Israel is a gangster state. I think the world already is recognizing that. The stuff that is being spewed by your guest, it's all lies. He knows it. He knows very well what's going on. He thinks that the war began on October 7. In fact, this war has begun 75 years ago. The Palestinians have been under occupation all this time. Marauding settlers and thugs in uniform.
But there was no West Bank until 75 years ago. There was no West Bank.
Gentlemen, one at a time, so I can, please, one at a time with respect, please.
I think, just let me finish. I think that the world has seen that these thugs in uniform that call themselves soldiers, that go in and steal goods, steal bicycles, blow up things just to enjoy themselves so they can show their girlfriends and so on. So I think that the whole world is beginning to realize that Israel for the monstrosity that it really is. I mean, I don't need to talk about this. It speaks for itself. I think what needs to happen right now, that the world, and especially the United States of America, that really Israel lives on an American umbilical cord. So they can stop this genocide right at this moment. That President Biden can stop it in a moment, because Israel cannot, go on for a day without American green light, American political, green light, American.
Well, Saeed, you bring up a good point.
Bombs.
You bring up a good point. Let me turn to Joshua, and let's agree we're not going to see eye to eye, gentlemen. We're not going to all see eye to eye on this, but let's be respectful and make sure we can hear one another speak. Let me move on to Joshua. Saeed says the United States has the power to stop this conflict, Joshua. Do you agree?
Yes, it does have the power to use a lot of persuasion with Israel, because it supplies the arms. It's got a big money package coming through, and Israel needs needs the UN on its side as well, which the United States can ensure. So yes, it's very important. The United States is very important in this, and President Biden has made it very clear that he's going to stand with Israel to the end. This is a part of his campaign, and it seems to be working for him, at least so far. In his campaign donations have never been higher.
Well, we're going to get to that in a moment, but what about in terms of credibility on the world stage, Joshua? What has this conflict and U.S. support done when it comes, like, resolution after resolution has been blocked by the United States in terms of coming up with a permanent ceasefire?
Well, there is a certain irony. I've followed the Syrian civil war very closely for the last 12 years, and there we had the Assad regime, very brutal, using starvation as a method of war, and Russia running interference for Syria. And when the UN and international community tried to open up border crossings in the north of the country to feed rebels and Syrian people, the Syrian government refused. And now the shoe is on the other foot. And America was very critical of Syria and Russia for helping him. And now the shoe is on the other foot, and Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war, and the United States is running interference for Israel in doing so. So it's funny how these, the roles have reversed today. It's an irony. Obviously, people do what they want to win their wars, and they're willing to do just about anything to do it.
Israel says this is about self-defense. It's about eliminating Hamas and getting rid of the Hamas threat. It's about Israel's security. Amotz, my question to you is, do you truly believe, do Israelis believe this operation that has left more than 30,000 Palestinians dead in Gaza is in fact going to make Israel safer?
First of all, the 30,000, if that number is accurate, which nobody can corroborate without being in the field, but if it is accurate, it includes at least 10,000 warriors, probably more. So let's not forget that. And that is, first of all, relevant in terms of counting the number of civilians dead. And secondly, in terms of your question, in terms of the military effect of what is happening, that is very effective. This is a debilitation of Hamas. So you're asking me now, rightly, where does all this fighting lead? From the viewpoint of Israelis like myself, and I say now only what I hope. I hope that this will result in Hamas's marginalization. All the governments of the Arab world, most of the governments of the Arab world detest Hamas and everything it represents. It is part of a regional threat to most of the region's governments, the threat of fundamentalism. That is a threat to the Egyptian regime. It is a threat to the Saudi regime, to the Jordanian, to many others. This is our common cause, us Israelis and the rest of the region. Hopefully, Hamas will be marginalized and a new order will emerge. In my own hope, not my government's hope, but my own hope. That new order will not only redesign Gaza, but will also create a longer-term solution or mapping of what of the Palestinian situation, both politically and diplomatically and economically. I think this is feasible now with the involvement and leadership of Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the United Arab Emirates and, of course, the United States and Europe. This is feasible, this is opportune, and this is what I hope will indeed happen.
All right, well, let me move on to the negotiations that are going on, have been going on in Doha. Saeed, what are you hearing from your sources? Is there any indication the parties can meet in the middle and there will be a ceasefire soon?
Well, I mean, we heard the President of the United States on Monday in an ice cream shop was saying that, you know, we could possibly arrive at a ceasefire by the following Monday, which is the 4th of March. So one did have hope, but, you know, that hope was immediately dispelled by the Israeli Prime Minister, who they keep, every time we get close to a, you know, feasible deal, it seems that the Israelis scuttle it by imposing new conditions that are really difficult to meet and so on. You know, the bottom line is that you have, I mean, you don't need to have conditions and so on to say a ceasefire must take place. A ceasefire must take place. I mean, you talk about, you heard a lot of propaganda, gobbledygook coming from the other guests. You know, with all due respect, I say this. I mean, it's, but that's the truth. When he talks about, you know, Saudi Arabia and all this thing, the truth is that Israel is at war with the Palestinians, period. Because Israel occupies the Palestinians. End the occupation. Get the hell out of there. Quit the siege of Gaza.
Right.
Let people live alone. So that's what you need to negotiate. The message coming out of, you know, you asked me about my sources and so on, what I hear, like everybody else, you know, in this business, when we hear that, you know, we get close, you know, there's probably the parameters of a deal. We might arrive at this deal in a couple of days, unless, you know, Mr. Netanyahu seems to be looking at this war as, you know,
go ahead, wrap up quickly, please.
Yeah, very, very quickly. Something that, you know, that is consistent with his political ambition and longevity.
I'm going to give the final word. Well, I'm going to go to Joshua and then the final word to Amotz. Joshua, what do you foresee coming from this, from these negotiations? Are you optimistic that all sides can finally strike an agreement? And why not a permanent ceasefire? Why a temporary one?
Well, they seem to be miles apart, frankly. Hamas wants Israel to withdraw from Gaza, and Israel says they're not going to do it. And we've heard from the Netanyahu government that he wants to continue to try to destroy Hamas, get back hostages, and he's going to remain in control of Gaza. Israel's going to remain in control of Gaza for the foreseeable forever, as far as we know. So they're diametrically opposed. The Palestinians want independence. They want Israel to leave, and that's not what Israel's going to do. So we're miles apart, and this is going to go on for some time, and I don't foresee Biden shrinking from his position that he's taken on this conflict.
Amotz, I'm going to let you have the final word.
Yeah, the tragedy lies in what Saeed said, and I don't know if you noticed, he said that the occupation is by now lasting 75 years. If he counts it this way, that means that as far as he is concerned, Israel's very existence is considered occupation, including the United Nations Partition Resolution of 1947. When we say occupation, the rest of the world, that is, they mean what happened in 1967, and that creates room for some kind of a deal whereby the Palestinians would have a state in the West Bank and Gaza, and the rest would be Israel. If you think that the occupation is 75 years old, there indeed will never be a deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and we'll continue fighting in perpetuity.
All right. This is obviously a very difficult and complicated issue. We certainly appreciate all of you being on the program. Amotz, Asa-El, Saeed Arikat, and Joshua Landis. Thank you. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Asya Namdar in Washington.